Good morning, everyone. While you're joining, we're just having our technical team set everything up. So please get your coffees, relax, and get ready for our presentation. So I see we're just after 10 o'clock. Should we get started? I'm just looking to Paul and Svetlana if we should get going.
Yes, let's go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. So welcome everyone this morning to our Good Governance and Designing Governing Systems for Self-Government. We're pleased to be here, and thank you, Can-Do, for supporting and sponsoring this important work to happen for our people across BC. What we are going to be doing is going through a 45-minute presentation, and we will, excuse me, provide introductions in just a moment, and we'll go into the agenda now. Okay, so first and foremost, my prayer and lieu of an elder being identified, and I guess I'm getting up there. I just wanted to say, Creator, help guide our thoughts, words, and actions to serve the best interests of your people today and future generations. Please allow us to have open hearts and open minds during this presentation and throughout the day so we can better serve our people. However, we'd like to also acknowledge traditional territory that we're working upon. That is the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. And welcome to everyone joining from our Can-Do team. I'll introduce myself. Hadalasis Aknensgudnelagan. Happy to be here. My name is Kunkreyas from Yaghujaanas clan of the Haida Nation. I've been doing this work for about 23 years and pleased to share the knowledge that I've garnered from our people and from studies with everyone today. Just let Mark introduce himself.
Good morning, I'm Mark Salter, husband and business partner with Laara, and we're pleased to be here with you today. I'm born and raised in Vancouver Island, and Haishka and Osiem Nishkwelaba to our friends on the Colombian-speaking lands, Victoria. And we're looking forward to engaging with all of you today. I think our last count was we have 25 participants out there, so looking forward to hearing from you. And if you do have questions and want to get answers, you can use the text box format, and our team will set us the notes across, and we will then read them back to you so you can see them. Justin's here on the left side of us of your screen. He will be helping to coordinate it from our end, and Svetlana will coordinate from the Can-Do side. So we'll begin.
Excellent. We will be having a 45-minute presentation and a 15-minute Q&A after. Our process is really quite organic, so we are here to serve you. So as we go through these materials, please feel free to ask questions as we go, share some experiences and best practices that might help others, and we will happily pass those along. Using your chat feature, please jump in at any point and let us know if you have any questions and clarifications, again, or sharing your own best practices for everybody else. So let's get started. So what we're going to be doing today is going through what good governance is, how it can be established and strengthened, and of course how we are starting to see First Nations designing their governing systems in preparation for self-government. And then we'll be going again through questions and answers and do some closing comments from yourselves and from the rest of our team, including the Can-Do team. And then we'll be signing off. We have at the very end slide our contact information if you have any questions, and also invite you to join us and mark your calendars for the 15th for another workshop where we're going to be talking about establishing development corporations. So without further ado, we're going to get started. And what we wanted to do is talk about what good leaders mean to us. And we've done this workshop in person a number of times, and we like to talk about that in terms of how you perceive good leaders. And we wanted to leave this in here to share with you as a virtual reflection for you to be able to think about those people in your lives who may have touched you, whether it was your aunt, your uncle, grandfather, grandmother, ancestors, maybe one of your children, who've done amazing work. And really good leaders are those people who have skills and capacity to be able to benefit their nation or their people and are willing to serve and wanting to take that responsibility. We have different perceptions around leadership in terms of the Western world and our people, and that responsibility is not taken lightly. With that, I do always want to share one of my favorite sayings that I've been recently heard crystal clear and beautifully articulated by one of our elders. And if you do things with a good heart, with a good mind, good things happen. So this is kind of the basis of our workshop in terms of how we see those things go forward with both the competency and the characteristics of good leaders. So it is good heart and good mind. So the characteristics of good governance and good leading systems for our First Nations revolves around some key characteristics we've seen not only in our communities traditionally, but also in the greater world. And this comes from international research as well as some layers of information we'll share from the Harvard Nation Rebuilding Project. This quote is one that we have the honor of. I worked with the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology, which is Canada's only Indigenous public post-secondary, independent public post-secondary institution in Canada. And what they did is they asked me to develop a Aboriginal governance and leadership certificate, diploma, and advanced diploma. So I wrote the curriculum for that. In doing so, we had an advisory team made up of the best minds from across North America, from our communities. One of them was Dr. Stephen Cornell from the Harvard Nation Rebuilding Project. And we sat there and talked about what does this mean? How can we clearly articulate what good governance is? And we came up with this saying, and I really like it because I think it summarizes really all the work that we do. And I'll let Mark read it out for you.
Good governance is the act of collaboratively establishing and adhering to the rules that coordinate a community's actions, development to achieve their goals.
So really good governance is around creating those rules and those systems by which a society organizes itself. And in doing so, there has to be a shared agreement and conversation with those people that you are serving, your constituent base, to be able to talk about what those rules could and should be. And when we do that, we always ask people, and we're going to ask for you to think of another thing here, to try and reflect upon what those things were that you heard, or what your traditional custom and practices were, or your customary laws regarding governance. Those are the things that help inform what we do today, in addition to best practices. What we find is that also embedded within there, and this is the ask, thinking about the language that's been used around good governance by your nation for many years helps to articulate and speak to a lot of characteristics that good leaders and good governing systems have, that there's depth of knowledge and information and that in English we can never articulate. So we really hope to ask you to think about and hopefully share with us some of those words that help conform all of our leadership practice. So governments are responsible for citizens around the world, and they all do the same thing. Governments serve citizens. And in doing so, there's a number of key things that they're responsible for. So before we get into the characteristics, I want to talk about, what is the purpose? What is form follows function? So what is the purpose of governments? And they are to first and foremost establish effective, accountable, ethical governments so that they can have those core institutions, meaning that not only the government, but also your development corporations, your associations, those types of things, have to be effective and efficient. And they should be built on a foundation of traditional laws and customs so that they are relevant to our culture, our people, our language, and our values, which are unique and not those of the Western world. They're also, all governments are responsible for developing a foundation to grow an economy. So it's small business, large business, tax deductions, incentives, grants, those types of things. Most importantly for our people, it's helping to establish an effective development corporation and create opportunities for small business. One aspect to that, of course, and I know Can-Do, when we looked at developing some of the materials for Can-Do training, 15 years ago, when I was part of the committee to review those materials, a really big part of that is small business. Thinking about small business, that is 98% of the driving force for our economies, both nationally and provincially. And in our communities, it's only about up to 15%. In really successful communities, on average, it's closer to 4 to 8%. So it's really something that we can develop further to make sure we have a diversified and strong and vibrant economy. So those are the things that the government works on as well. Also, we know this very well, it's building infrastructure, the roads, the highways, the schools, those types of things that have a key benefit to improving the quality of life of people. The other piece is making sure that public services, and again, we know these very well through ISC programs, supported delivery systems, education, health, housing, all of those pieces have to be in place for citizens, including those that we don't see from ISC, really taking a look at that broader scope of those types of responsibilities that government has. It includes protection of citizens. Now, I know some nations across Canada do have that as an agreement, but the vast majority don't. And that is a responsibility of government that we have to start looking at and thinking about if we're to fulfill that full role of government. It means taking on all those responsibilities, not those that are just funded by ISC, because our job as leaders in communities is to be able to serve them as effective governments that would be first and foremost taking our priorities and our direction from our citizens, not from ISC. And establishing the revenue streams that support the long-term self-governing authority and capabilities of the nation, and that means taxation. So when we take a look at that big, larger scope, it's really important that as we start to build our nations and our governments to be able to move forward into these large and growing areas of jurisdictional authority that we're starting to see more and more increasingly being respected. We know is a long way to go, but at this point, we're starting to see some interesting and really amazing things happen in our worlds. And in doing so, we really have to enhance the quality and the standard of how we govern our nations. And we have a lot of amazing nations. So again, if you have experiences you'd like to share, please let us know. But we do have amazing nations that are doing great work, and we have to take a look at what is the best we can do, because our responsibility is not just for ourselves, our families, it's for our community, and it's for future generations, which means doing nothing less than our best is unacceptable. So we have to do our best. When we take a look at this, I'll let Mark read this out. This comes from the United Nations, and it's a really interesting piece that has been long-standing in terms of recognizing what good governance means.
In a nation's international research for good governance, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, identifies 8 major characteristics for good governance as being. They must be participatory, people must be engaged. Consensus-oriented, the majority will rule. Accountable, transparent. What you do is got to be seen in a good way to all the community. Responsive, and particularly culturally relevant. Make it your own, including your own language into these conversations, making sure that people feel comfortable in bringing their thoughts and feelings to these issues as well. Efficient and effective governing institutions as per nation building. The theory also means culturally relevant, supporting organizational development and strategic orientation. So take the community's aspirations and desires and fold them into the way the government operates and reflects back the values of that community. Equitable and inclusive. All voices should be heard, even those who are not necessarily in agreement, but also it helps to keep the course steady by getting all the different perspectives in place, keeps the canoe in the right direction. And follows the rule of law, and according to First Nations customary laws when it's appropriate. And you can insert your own beliefs and laws into your government's operation systems as a collective will of your community. That's a very important part of moving your nation and your community forward.
Justin, did I see some text there? Do we have some comments? No?
Okay.
So we'll be going into this a little bit, because when we take, again, a look at governing systems, as we start to unfold and unpack some of these ideas, again, they are almost always consistent with the way we had governing systems. So our customary laws and protocols around traditional governing systems were just as thorough. Our protocols were our policies. Our laws were our system. So for me being Haida, it would be going to a longhouse and for 3 or 4 days having elders and leaders come up and speak to our laws, to reiterate them on a regular basis so everyone would listen, share, discuss, and then be able to adhere to those laws to ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens. And those are the things that we want to be able to make sure we revitalize. What were those practices that are sometimes hidden? They're never lost, they're hidden. They're within us, they're in the land, they're in our people. And if we put all of those things together, we are able to rebuild those things. So when we take a look at nation rebuilding as the theory that we want to make sure we also be able to complement this discussion, and that comes from the Harvard Nation Rebuilding Project, or Nation Building Project, which was corrected as rebuilding by many elders. Some of the key areas that they found as common themes from nations who were very successful is that they had practical self-rule. That meant that the practical part was having efficient and effective organizations. Self-rule meaning that they had their own sets of laws that they developed and were able to adhere to. So again, efficient and effective organizations, and clear and agreed upon laws and rules that they have for their nations. The capable governing institutions underpinning all that, of course, meaning that it also meant not just the government, but their development corporations, their judiciary bodies, because in the United States they have their own courts, their institutions in terms of learning, so their post-secondary institutes. Another piece is the cultural match. So really, when we take a look at cultural match, it's critical that that is the foundation of all of our work, because we are unique, we are different. One of the most significant that I find in application is our value set. So as Indigenous people, we are collectivist value-based, meaning that when someone says, what's in it for you, we immediately think of what's in it for our community. Our thought is around the collective interests of our people more so. Again, that's most First Nations traditional systems and many First Nations today. The Western system, when someone says what's in it for you, is individualistic values-based, meaning that when someone says what's in it for you, they only think of themselves or maybe their immediate family. So it's not the same approach. We're actually speaking a different language when we have those differing value systems. So it's really important to clarify when we're speaking with people what our values are and understanding their values so we can have a better working relationship with them. But we don't want to make any mistakes around that. There is a very, very clear difference. Strategic orientation, meaning that we do our work. As leaders, we do that careful work, reflecting like we always had. Mark was referring to the canoe earlier, and we like to think about this sometimes as your journey being the canoe. If you're preparing for a journey, you do your work. What time of year is it? What are the conditions? It's the same as what we're doing today. What are we doing? What are the conditions internally and externally? What are some of the people and partnerships we have to have along the way to visit and to refuel our stocks and be able to go from there? So again, as we go through our journey, what are the things we need to know externally in terms of strategic partnerships for development corporations or joint venture partnerships for major community projects? All of those things are really important to understand in terms of making sure that we have that strategic orientation that includes and is built upon, most importantly, our people and our people's views and ideas, meaning a comprehensive community plan so we have an understanding of where they want to go. And of course, leadership development and exercising that authority based upon your value set. So the process of nation rebuilding is unique by every single nation and how they develop out from there. But most importantly, it needs to be built on those types of characteristics, importantly for us, around institutional capacity in our conversation today. It means that we have to have a sustained strategic collective action towards common articulated goals, those shared goals that we all see we want to go down. And it means continuous meaningful citizen participation. That means that we create a plan, and it takes a long time to create that plan, but we also have to have the habit of talking to our citizens every quarter to say, here's how far we got. Are we on the right track? You wanted a daycare, oh, but you wanted after school care as well. Okay, we'll have to make that plan adjustment. And then here's how far we've gone. We've gone one more step, another quarter later, we've got the daycare and the after school care. Oh, but you wanted tutoring. Okay, we'll put that in. So as we go down that road, we have to make sure that we're responsive always to citizens. That means we have to have a meaningful relationship with them. And we'll go into that later around how that system has built itself too. And it means that we have this ongoing learning organization approach that we always try to purport, that we are all learning. And I always find that the most respected and wise elders that we meet are those that are humble and are always learning. And I'm thinking of one of our elders from Joan from Sepkoteen, and she always talks about learning from cradle to grave. And that means that you're always humble enough to be learning from everybody, from your kids, from your ancestors, all the way through.
And from the environment around you. You're opening your eyes to seeing all the things that are affecting you and your community. And it's not always the obvious, but only those who look up and see what's around them are informed enough. And that's the continuous humility of being open and being able to learn and being not too arrogant to think you know everything already. That nature will always teach you a few things.
Okay. So when we talk about good governance, again, this is one of the key characteristics that we find from the United Nations research, and we know from our own people, that it has to be built on a system that engages citizens. So again, we're going to get into a bit more later, but we used to have a shared leadership system where most nations had systems by which an extended family member would become the spokesperson for that family, to be able to engage other extended family leaders, to be able to say, this is what our family wants, this is what the needs are, we've had this issue come up, and how do we work through this together? And then of course an elder advisory to be able to say, this is the way you go. So there was always a very constant ongoing conversation and this very strong collectivist value set around us having agreement together and having that shared conversation and agreement on all of those matters as they relate to not only plans, but also our rules and policies and protocols. So it's really important to do that, but most importantly in those rules, and as we always know, it's important for those rules and protocols to respect those who are most vulnerable, our elders, our youth, our women, to be able to make sure that they are protected, that they are taken care of, and most importantly, they're heard, because if we can make sure that our systems reflect and support their needs, it's much easier to make sure that everybody's needs are met. So when we take a look at that, it's making sure that citizen engagement is crucial to the ongoing effectiveness of the government. And Mark alluded to it earlier. Can you just go into that a little bit?
Citizen engagement?
The feedback system.
Oh, the feedback system. Yes, the whole concept of just listening to one positive side of the spectrum. Those who are in the majority will say, will not necessarily be right, but they'll be in the majority. So opening your eyes and ears to all sides of a conversation so that you can hear some of the negative, and that helps to bring you back onto course. So as you move your canoe and your community through the waters around you, you're going to have the tide and the wind working against you. And so you can find a way to balance that. Use them both and take them to help you, to keep you on course. By sticking to the one voice that you're hearing, you can be divergent from your path. You can move off your course. So by bringing in the counter conversation brings you back to the center. You don't want to be going too far one way or the other. You want to stay including everybody as you go along the way. And then we like to use that metaphor of the canoe. As you plan your journey, you're looking for those things that make you successful and get you to your destination. Stops, rest, taking the route that's best for your team and your crew in the canoe. Not everyone has the same capabilities, so you've got to be inclusive of all those in your canoe that have the ability to get your community forward.
Excellent, thank you. So the other piece that we have demonstrated here is for supporting that, and that's a broad look at systems that's embedded in research and science, where we take a look at any system, natural systems, social systems, scientific systems, engineering systems. Whenever there is only positive feedback, you go divergent and you stop fulfilling your purpose. So don't surround yourself with yes people. Surround yourself with good people who are smart and who are able to give you feedback and information to be able to always, as Mark was saying, correct your course as you go. So the next piece is consensus oriented. So we spoke a bit about that already in terms of how we used to have our systems set up and how important it is to remain and establish those systems again today. And just a little bit of a sidebar, we are talking about all of these characteristics in terms of systems because that is the job of a leader, is to develop the rules and the policies and the systems by which our communities are able to fulfill those goals and that vision that they set out. So when we take a look at a consensus-oriented system, it means that we have to make sure that it is consistent in terms of how we engage, that we have an approach where we not only mentally prepare ourselves, to go into a conversation or multiple conversations where we're looking for consensus. And in the process, we're not just trying to get them to bend to our will, we're trying to build capacity and understanding so that when we have that understanding of your perspective and my perspective, they can quite often live in harmony, meaning that there can be an and, not always an or. And as we move in towards that understanding and that meeting of needs as opposed to rights, we build consensus. And meeting needs and rights are another bit of a conversation that I should just add a little bit of comment into. And then what we go into is the needs is what we see our traditional systems built around, and rights is a Western system based on the argumentation and judicial system that was established in ancient Greece. Okay, so I just got a notice on our time. We're having so much fun here. I hope you're enjoying yourself too. I'm seeing some comments coming in, so it's wonderful. Good governing systems are also accountable to their citizens, making sure that when you have your plan that's based on their needs and interests, that you come back and report to them. Quite often, the nations who are doing really well, the one failing is they're not reporting all this great work. So if they come back and say, every quarter, this is what we've done, this is where we are, it allows the nation to move forward because the conversation is still ongoing. And some nations are scared to go back and engage their community because it hasn't been a while. But it's so important, even more so then. So really important to be accountable by coming back and saying, this is where we are. The next piece is being transparent, meaning that you decide upon those shared agreements and laws, and you do it in a transparent way, meaning that you have an understanding and people are shared with who makes the rules, what their authorities are, how it's going to be enforced, and the decision-making around that enforcement and how it's going to be decided. All of those things have to be supported and understood by citizens throughout the nation. The other piece is making sure that it's, again, we talked about this a little earlier, responsive to the evolving needs of citizens. We are in a time where we are seeing significant and very rapid change. And so where we used to have 5 and 10-year plans, they are now commonly 3 and maximum 5-year plans because the pace of change is so fast in our world today that for us to be able to expect to have a goal that's relevant today and then set today for 10 years from now is just not going to happen. So it's really 3 to 5 year goals that we see happening. So again, this is really built around having comprehensive community plans, both for nation governments as well as development corporations in the form of community economic development plan. Effective and efficient governing systems, and we talked about that, having clear policies set at all 3 levels. That means your governance, your administration, your departments all have policies so that there's no guesswork around who does what, which creates trust, security, safety, ensures that you have better outcomes and deliverables in terms of well-being for your citizens. And the comprehensive governance policies that we just talked about also includes making sure that you have those types of, again, protection of Aboriginal rights and safeguarding of those assets for the benefit of all members. So that's the broad set of responsibilities all leaders have, and that's again in this set system that we try to describe as Indigenous governing framework, is making sure that you have those rules by which, as in the governance policies, that you do your own work, those rules and policies as they relate to how you relate to the senior manager, who's either your CEO or your senior administrator. And then your strategic planning. There has to be policies and rules around that. Planning and accountability to make sure that that's understood. And then of course your relationship with citizens. And this model is something that we built over the last 20 years, but really have refined and been using it in a pretty standard format for about 12 years. And it's an Indigenous system intended to be able to be holistic, but also looking at every single area a leader could and should affect positive change for. When we take a look at that, this is just a quick framework describing some of those policies. So again, around those policies for how a nation does its work internally amongst the leadership system, how the nation relates to its senior manager, the direction and the limits that it sets for the senior manager, how the nation sets out the relationship with the citizens, being able to collect feedback and make sure they're on the right track, and strategic direction and reporting. And all of those are really important in the framework system. Most importantly, leaders have to know and stay at the strategic level, meaning that they focus on bylaws, policies, and
Practice.
procedures based on your customary laws and protocols, so that you can make sure that you stay at the strategic level rather than potentially introducing risk and micromanaging. So that dotted red line is just staying away from operational matters, but it's dotted, not solid, so that you can take a look at having those conversations back and forth with that feedback, but making sure that you don't start going into micromanaging. So we like this system because it is about getting your house in order, and this is our lawn house. So the next piece is, again, just talking about that a little bit further, that council has that responsibility to be proactively planning and ensuring good governance, but also making sure that as it does so, it controls everything it must, not everything it can. Mark?
Now, council's role is strategic. It must be disciplined. So council has to know where its limits should be and encourage those who are working for the nation to step up and do their jobs with the directions given by council through the general manager. Adherence to compliance with established laws and bylaws and practices, that's council's strategic goals and roles.
We do have a question from Donna asking, will we get a copy of the presentation?
Yes, Donna, we made sure, because we have a lot of time when we go into these workshops where people are furiously writing, so I'm sorry we forgot to mention that earlier. We did arrange with Svetlana and Paul, and we sent over the PowerPoint in PDF format, so it'll be shared with you after the session, so no need to take tons of notes. Thank you very much for raising that. Is there any others? No.
Council staying strategic, remains focused and advocates for the citizenships and agreed upon issues resolution policy. So when there are going to be disputes with goals and outcomes, people will need to know there's a process for bringing the grievances and concerns forward, and that's council's role to enforce and support that process going forward. And report on the progress. The big thing about the good work that you do, and communities and leadership do great work on a day-to-day basis. It's not always obvious. So it's really on the role of council to share their success, not just what's yet to be done, but show what has been done. Show that there's a foundation being built, and this community is growing and broadening its capacity to be able to move forward and upwards. And so sharing what you have done, what you've been good at, and sometimes what didn't work. So people know that there's honesty and openness in the process going forward. Wanted to do a project A, had an expectation of certain outcomes, didn't meet them. Reasons why we may go forward, may change our approach, but sharing that openness and gaining that trust and support of the community is vital to being considered to be a progressive and inclusive community.
And it's really important too, because it is our way that we celebrate things, and that celebration has a lot of wisdom in it, because psychologically and sociologically, success breeds success. So when we start to show people that we're doing well, they get excited and lean in a bit more themselves to be able to do good things. And we start to see people get excited. Your staff's good work gets supported and acknowledged, and they do harder work for you. So it's really important to remember success breeds success. And that is our way of doing things too, for good reason. So again, when we take a look at where council can and should stay strategic, we talk about the strategic control system. And that is when we have a really good strategic plan based on, again, up on a CCP. Sorry, the font has gone a little bit funny on this slide for some reason. What we have in terms of control measures, similar to our canoe journey, is taking a look at those performance measures, very clearly understood. Report back to me when you get to Point Atkinson on your canoe. We know very clearly that in our strategic plan that if we're looking at a daycare and the daycare says, we want to have 100% of our students ready and kindergarten ready for the K-7 system. If we get them all transitioning to a point in there where they're able to do that transition effectively, we now have a performance measure. So any performance measure that is set has to be the one that's agreed upon, but it is also a magic piece in terms of if leadership stays focused on that conversation, they remain strategic, and you can celebrate that success. Great, you got to Point Atkinson. Great, we got a daycare. That's excellent. Share it with the community and celebrate it. That's what they wanted. We got it for them. Excellent. But when we start going into other things, how did you do it? Why did you do it? That conversation is not strategic. It's really leadership's role to define the parameters by which things can operate in those rules, and then to be able to say, now get to that point. And if you haven't gotten to that point in that performance measure, How come? What happened? What can we learn? Oh, okay, that has to change. How can we fix and get back on course? And that's how leaders can stay strategic. When we take a look at those policy levels, we talked about that earlier. It's around governance, operations, and department. So we always have the 3 levels, all of which should be developed in concert with those people who were affected by them. So staff being and participating in the HR and finance policies, citizens participating in the department's education and housing policies, senior administrators participating in the governance policies to inform and provide feedback so they're relevant and effective for your organization. As we find those systems happening, we find that increased performance happens. So if we take a look back years ago to Member 2 when they developed ISO certification standards for their nation and became an international success, and still are having people knock down their doors to do work with them for such a small community, it began around this type of policy development, taking a look at individual process. Someone's applying for a post-secondary application. Okay, we know someone's going to come again, so we better have some rules around it. Similarly, when we had fishing systems, this was this family's fishing rights, but the fish have now migrated away from that area. What do we do about it? We know it's going to happen again, so what are the rules? So we establish those rules, and as those rules get applied more and more, we find organizational capacity grows. And again, we had elegant, sophisticated, integrated systems and economies and societies in our traditional practices. We still can again today. And it's really important that we have those conversations about what those rules are. And the more we do, the more we write them down, agree upon them, and live by them, we have organizational capacity development and effectiveness to be able to exercise the jurisdictional authority we're seeing realized every single day more and more.
Part of that concept of engagement is the mantra of nothing about us without us. If you're going to make a rule and engage about a certain group or community section or in your business, and you don't involve those people in that process of creating the processes and rules and procedures, then there's no buy-in. And it's I'm not involved, so I'm not going to be able to comply. So if you're going to do something for a department or a section or create something, the engagement's important, because nothing about us without us is a really good way to ensure you've got good participation to move the process forward.
The other benefit around having rules established where everyone can agree upon, participate in developing them, and then live by them, and then see increased performance is you also mitigate risk. You're now predicting where you can have challenges, and therefore you don't have them as many. Okay, so I just got a time notice here, so we're going to do a little bit of a quick catch-up. We've talked about a lot of things already that we're going to go into, so we'll do a little bit of wrap-up there. Again, we talked about some of the key characteristics being equitable and inclusive, making sure that all citizens, including those who are most vulnerable, have access to, participate in, and benefit from those governing institutions' work. Again, that's not just your government, that's your development corporation. Should be just as effective as should your any of your other organizations that you have set up to serve your nation that are benefiting from the assets held of the nation, meaning that it's community owned. Good governance means that you follow the rules of law. And we always say, first and foremost, your laws, your customary laws and practices. They're meaningless unless they're developed and based upon your laws. Then we also have to take a look at those external laws, human rights, employment law, rights laws, all of those types of things that have to be applied as well. But first and foremost, your laws. And also we wanted to share with you that because of the state we're in right now and how we're having this honored meeting with you in this way, it's also important, we thought it was responsible for us to share with you some of the research we've done and work we've done before in other learning sessions around how leaders can do their best work during times of change or times of crisis. It's really important to make sure that during this time, those good leadership practices are really, really applied and adhered to, because it's when it's being tested the most. So we make sure that as leaders that we step outside of ourselves to always be looking at the needs of others. We see this all over the place, not only in our communities, but around the world, to meet those needs of others and make sure that when we take a look at this, we also respect and understand that people are going through a lot of emotional stuff right now. That's fear, which for a lot of people is masked by anger or sadness, but people are scared right now, and leaders responsible to lead from the heart. As we said earlier, if you do things with good heart and good mind, good things happen, but it starts with the heart. So it means that you care about people. And when we take a look at those leaders who govern their emotions well, understand and try to serve others in a meaningful way with their current skills and capacity, but also open the doors to have other experts come in and sit with them to be able to be a crisis management team, to get their skills and abilities to be able to help do the best work for the nation they can. That's critical right now. Making sure you adhere to your values, again, taking care of those most vulnerable at this time, and taking responsibility and not assigning blame is a really strong characteristic of good leaders. So, leadership competency during times of change, we also want to just explain that, what we just talked about a little bit more, that you have these types of plans, that you're flexible with these types of plans. You may have a reopening for your nation soon, and then you see some of these outbreaks happening and you need to extend your current pandemic response plan or your crisis and protection plan. Making sure that you have the open, transparent chain of command. So who makes decisions, when, how do people feed into that if they have a concern? So a lot of communication, high communication. So that's really, really important during this time and any time of challenge. Finally, it's making sure that you at all times adhere to your own policies, plans, and rules so that they can be supported throughout as well. And making sure that you are very highly disciplined and humble to make sure that you do lead from the heart, that you have that characteristic of leadership where you care about people come out first and foremost, recognizing that a lot of people are scared, and also that some people in that fear may be triggered into any trauma, and particularly for our people. So you have to be extra careful and extra sensitive and build your own capacity in terms of conflict management so that you can manage those issues to be able to make sure everyone's safe and everyone's taken care of, particularly those who are most vulnerable. You can read the PowerPoint in more detail later. We have a lot of language in there, but we're trying to go over this quickly for you. Again, leaders, the most effective ones are the ones who are vision and oriented and inspiring. So even during these difficult times, trying to inspire hope, remember the vision, take care and do all the work you have to do, but also try and keep people positive, particularly now when there's a lot of mental stress or during times of change, there's mental stress. Maintaining that vision and that focus is critically important so people feel inspired and can move through those challenges and fears in a healthy way. When we take a look at the designing your own nation as you move into self-government, this is something we wanted to share quickly, is that as we see this moving out in many of our communities that we're working with, who are moving into agreements right now, this is the system we talked about earlier, where many of our nations had one person, whether it's a hereditary chief, whether it was a ULCM, I'm forgetting some of the other names. We have so many members who have different clan systems or nation family systems where they would have one person rise to the top as a spokesperson to serve their extended family. And those extended family leaders would come together and one person would serve as that spokesperson. So it was a very collectivist-based, engaged system of governing. And it's called a shared leadership system that many corporations have been modeling for the last few decades because it's so effective. Of course, during times of crisis, we moved into a more hierarchical system where perhaps a war chief or a master fisherman would be able to come out and help. But during the majority of decisions, it was around having a shared leadership system where every person counted, their voice mattered, they had a role, and they had a responsibility.
Everybody knew that and was appreciated for their contributions. That's an important part of that leadership, recognizing and supporting those people who are a little bit unsure, be anxious in these times. It's knowing that those are the responsibilities that you have to bring one together and knowing that that's your job, nothing else. It's to be that inspirational point.
And again, sometimes as you move through this system where we've gone through constitution work with many nations, we find that some people are insecure because they don't remember, they don't know these systems. But again, it's embedded and it's been interrupted, but it's not lost. It's in each of us, it's in the land. I saw this wonderful piece that we saw recently on one of our nations that we're celebrating, and they had a statement saying the land remembers us. I believe that too. that we have that in each of our stories too. And when we come together, we're going to be able to rebuild those systems and pieces that were our customary laws and systems that we have to go back to because they were so effective. We started a little bit late, so we're just going to go into the Q&A just in a couple minutes, but we'd like to wrap up the system or this process. But if you do have any questions, please again jump in. We're happy to stop and talk about anything that you have any queries or want more information on. So you have one now?
No, just a reminder to everyone here that if you do have questions, you're welcome to send them to the Carden Consulting account, which is the host at the moment, or either of the other co-hosts, and we'll relate them as we go.
Thank you. So again, this is looking at the hierarchical system as we moved into different times of stress. Yes, we do move into that type of more looking to one leader to help us, those experts in those areas, similar to how we have health leaders helping us right now. But then when we return to to regular times, not times of crisis, we revert back to that shared leadership system, which is critically important. Having said that, it's important to recognize that our governing systems in the past 150 years have not been ours. In 1869, our chiefs were forced at gunpoint, at imprisonment levels, that they had to succumb to and be able to adhere to the governing system imposed by INAC at the time. It was meant to be a control system for INAC. It never was meant to be a governing system. So we do have a chief and council, but we don't have any kind of assembly process. That is a system to engage our citizens, which is the magic behind any governing system. And it's one that I believe was purposefully removed because they didn't want us to be able to organize and form and think and operate effectively. However, this is the most critical thing to reinstitute back into our organizations and governing systems so that we can be effective. So when we take a look at the system before and what we're trying to build today, it's really important to recognize that delivering INAC systems is not self-government. Delivering their programs and services is not self-government. Meeting the needs of our citizens is self-government. Designing our own governing systems is self-government. All of those things move us to that level. But we can't assume and we can't not look around the world around us and see what systems have been built without our voice in it. So it's really important to think about what's going on in our systems around us today. Many of our nations we're working with, we're helping to be able to revitalize those traditional assembly processes so that citizens have a voice in their governing system. So it is really, really neat to see it gradually move in and build capacity along the way so it can be revitalized in a very meaningful and effective way. So why good governance is important is because it provides consistency, safety, reliability, trust. It instills pride in citizens to say my nation's operating well. It reduces stress, it reduces conflict, it improves morale for citizens, it improves morale for staff. It makes sure that they know you're accountable. When this type of information, you have comprehensive governing systems is shared with funders, they write the checks more readily. When that type of governing system is comprehensive and well thought out, internationally, private sector and public sector partners will come to the table more readily to work with you because they know you have a fair, transparent governing system. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and there's no unpredicted low risk. It's much lower risk. So the designing nations piece, we've gone over quite a bit already. We talked about what we see in terms of best practices we wanted to share, that there's treaty, that a lot of people are walking away from treaty. There's agreements happening outside of the treaty process for nations who've never even really been in treaty. So a lot of nations are moving into those modern agreements quite readily now. Both require negotiated land claims, but as of the modern treaty, it starts to integrate other pieces. How do we care for our people? How do we have sustainable development? How do we establish an effective government? So to make sure that we have a fair and effective system, or what we have underlined here, representative democracy, a democratic system that's able to serve everyone. When we take a look at, again, our traditional systems, that's critically important to research and talk with your citizens about what it was. When we take a look at the types of governing systems and what how they're being applied today in terms of those agreements as they move into self-governing systems, most of them are through the system we've been sharing today. looking at the prior ones, it's really important to know how we came as well. So in the past, it was looked at as a public government system. So they're trying to classify us into municipal bodies and make us fit into that peg. It was developed and implemented by a number of nations, but it has its limitations, and those are being revisited, most of them now too. When we take a look at the next system that was developed for treaties, it has moved into this modern treaty system that again takes a look at increasingly the broader context and the more complex issues involved in rebuilding nations' governing systems. And those are called the modern treaties. And those also include a number of different pieces with fiscal agreements and financing arrangements that support the nation to be able to develop its governing system most effectively. They're usually phased out over multiple years as opposed to a one-time check for a limited agreement or a limited benefit agreement. The sectoral government agreements that are included also include First Nations Health Authority, other areas of jurisdiction by which we're starting to see those become materialized in our in Canada. So this is looking at the NISCA system. It's an older system, again, based on some of the original treaty models. A very traditional system, which was wonderful, and they have the Council of Elders, which we've highlighted in red because it's pretty cool. So in terms of its comprehensiveness, it was really well done, but it was a modern treaty. We take a look at the most recent modern treaty, and that's the Tawasin one, and they have a legislative assembly, executive council, judicial council, and a speaker and chair of meetings. And then they have an advisory made up of citizens to be able to inform their work. So they do have a feedback loop built into there. When we take a look at Hawaiiat, Mark, can you share this one?
The council, and they're an executive council, and it's the structure is such that they keep the assembly of the peoples together, and they consult with them. But the committees of council are at one level. There's the executive council with access, sort of a second review of processes going forward, and that's a critical part because it can help you stay on course if you have more than one side being looked at. And then the interesting part of it is that they've incorporated their hereditary system into the process. They've used their traditional family systems, and we've seen and heard case law from their territory around how effective they've been able to use their hereditary systems to keep their own hereditary chiefs in line. That's an important component, and we hold our hands up to Hawaii for leading the way in that area.
And consistent with what we said before, what we see is that those nations who revitalize their nations built on those traditional systems do better. And when you go to Hawaii territory, they own the city. They own the entire area and doing really well, so they're excellent. Here's another one that's a West Bank case law. They have their chief and council system as a West Bank government, and then external advisory planning, which is made up of external interest groups. So they've maintained a very more rigid system. Slayaman case law, and they have a legislature and government administration as well. So when we take a look at those nations that have built out the more comprehensive and the depth of organizational capacity through traditional and customary laws, and we see it reflected in a governing system that is multi-layered and more shared, so more horizontal, we see those nations do better. So shared leadership systems are absolutely the way to go. And this is the most recent one that we've been working with Zekutine on their emerging case study, and we had the honor of working with them on their constitution for the past few years and helping them to establish the Women's Council and then their nation system, which is starting to emerge, where this was their traditional system where they had area leaders for each of these communities as well. And they also had a matrilineal form of government with community groups too. So again, thinking about those systems, it's important to think about what your leaders' roles and responsibilities were across the board leaders to be able to make sure that as you establish the rules and policies by which your community operates to realize their goals, how does their voice matter? So it's really, really important to think about those things. So we've had some questions coming up as we go, but we wanted to make sure we have some purposeful time here to answer any of your questions. So please let us know your thoughts and questions you may have. Again, you will get a copy of the PDF, but we'd like to know if there's anything else we can help clarify.
And any of our hosts come back to us all?
So I just want to check, do they have the ability to unmute themselves? Okay, so you can either type in your question or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. We're happy with either.
Hi, this is Svetlana. I actually just received an email from one of the participants thanking you for this informative presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana.
And as always, we do provide a lot of support outside of our regular work. So if you have questions, if we can help in any way, if we can share tools, anything related to anything we talked about today, we're happy to answer questions or provide any support we can, share any of our tools that we have as well.
And we're going to be back here next week on the 15th of July, 10 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time at the North Shore Studios of Carden Consulting. We look forward to seeing you again then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura and Mark and Justin, for this presentation. And yes, next week, same time, same place. And the presentation will be on the establishing, reestablishing effective development corporations. So please join us.
Thank you. Aishka.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.